Imagine you inherit a house. Not a modest one, a mansion. 40 rooms, marble floors, bronze fixtures, a library stuffed with leather-bound books. You didn't build it, you didn't pay for it. But when the neighbors ask you, tell them you designed it yourself. Now scale that up to an entire continent. Scale it up 500 years. What if Europe's most celebrated golden age, the Renaissance, was not the dawn of a new civilization, but the careful unpacking of one that had already died? What if the genius was real, but the raw materials belonged to someone else? What if the rebirth was funded not by invention, but by inheritance? That is the question we are going to chase today, and the further we follow it, the more uncomfortable it becomes. The standard account of the Renaissance is one of the most satisfying narratives in all of history. Europe suffers. The Black Death arrives in 1347, tearing through the continent with savage efficiency, killing an estimated 1 in 3 people across much of the population, and worse, in dense urban centers: Florence, Siena, Paris, cities built over generations reduced in months. It is a catastrophe with no modern parallel. And then somehow Europe rebuilds. Merchants grow bold, banking families. Above all, the Medici of Florence accumulate staggering wealth. In 1453, the Ottoman Empire seizes Constantinople, and a flood of Byzantine scholars escapes westward, carrying manuscripts of Plato, Aristotle, and Euclid that Western Europe had barely encountered. A spark catches. Artists begin studying ancient proportions. Architects measure Roman ruins. Humanists ask new questions about the nature of man. In 1492, Columbus sails. Within decades, Spanish fleets are hauling silver from the mountains of the Americas, first from Mexico, then from the great mines of Potosi in modern Bolivia. Wealth pours into European treasuries. Popes commission basilicas. Princes build palaces. Michelangelo climbs scaffolding. Leonardo fills notebooks. A continent is reborn. It is a beautiful story, logical, inspiring, and like all stories, it leaves certain things out. Let us be careful here. An anomaly is not proof of anything, but 5 anomalies sitting in the same room begin to ask questions. The Renaissance did not wait for American silver to arrive. Filippo Brunelleschi completed the Florence Cathedral dome in 1436, 56 years before Columbus reached the Caribbean. Lorenzo Ghiberti's monumental bronze doors for the Florence Baptistry were finished in the early 1400s. These were projects of colossal material expense. Tons of bronze, vast quantities of marble, precision iron fittings. All of it funded decades before transatlantic treasure fleets became a factor. Where did the capital come from? After the Black Death, Europe was not merely grieving. It was functionally short-staffed. Skilled trades pass through apprenticeships that take a decade or more to produce one competent craftsman. When half a city's population vanishes in 18 months, those chains of transmission break. Quarrymen, bronze casters, master masons, these are not roles you fill by posting a notice. Yet within 2 generations, Europe was undertaking the most ambitious construction program since imperial Rome. The labor mathematics are puzzling. Walk through Rome today and look not at the facades, but at the bones column shafts bearing Roman tool marks, propping up church porticos, marble slabs with Latin inscriptions laid sideways into palace floors, ancient foundations forming the bedrock of supposedly new civic buildings. Historians call this recycling, and it was, but recycling on this scale implies something important. There was an extraordinary amount of pre-cut, pre-refined, pre-transported material simply lying available across the Italian peninsula Someone had already done the hard work. The Renaissance builders just had to collect it. During the Renaissance, classical sculptures appeared from the earth, with a frequency that begins to seem theatrical. The Laocoon group was unearthed in 1506. The Apollo Belvedere gained its celebrated status around the same era. The condition of many recovered pieces, by any geological standard, was suspiciously intact marble, exposed to uncontrolled soil and moisture. For 1,000 years typically suffers badly. Some scholars have suggested that certain pieces were never truly lost, merely stored tucked away in vaults, or collapsed structures within known urban boundaries, waiting for the right political moment to become significant. After plague emptied the continent, it did not return to wilderness. Not entirely Roman roads still connected cities. Roman bridge foundations still cross rivers. Aqueduct channels still trace the hills. The stone geography of empire did not simply dissolve because the bureaucrats who managed it had gone. Renaissance rulers did not govern blank landscapes. They governed the ghost of a vastly larger world. Here is where the picture starts to sharpen. Think carefully about what the Roman Empire actually represented in material terms. Centuries of tax revenue extracted from provinces, stretching from Scotland to Syria. Marble shipped from quarries in Africa and Greece. Copper and tin, mined across Iberia and the British Isles, refined, alloyed into bronze and cast into public monuments across thousands of cities. When that empire contracted, it did not take its physical legacy with it. The infrastructure stayed. The stone stayed, the metal stayed. By the time Renaissance elites consolidated control over northern Italy, they presided over cities that were, in some ways, more materially rich than their own populations could account for. They controlled the ruins of a civilization that had invested 500 years building things that nobody had bothered to fully dismantle. The Colosseum alone supplied stone for dozens of papal projects. The bronze removed from the Pantheon's roof is not myth. It is documented. It was melted down and repurposed. The question worth asking is, how much more happened without documentation? There is an economic concept relevant here. Capital stock real wealth is not only coins. It is also roads, foundations, refined metals, cut stone, and navigable harbors. Rome accumulated enormous capital stock across its centuries of expansion. When governance collapsed, that stock did not evaporate. It depreciated slowly in plain sight, available to whoever controlled the territory. Renaissance Europe may have operated not as a startup, but as a receivership, the beneficiary of a prior entity's assets. This transforms the logic of the era. If you already possess ready-cut marble blocks, you do not need a fully operational quarry. If bronze monuments are available for smelting, you do not need peak copper mine output. If ancient roads already link your cities, infrastructure investment can be redirected towards spectacle rather than function. The inheritance lowers the barrier to everything else. Critics of this framing raise fair objections. Trade networks were real and expanding. The Venetian and Genoese commercial empires were sophisticated enough to move capital across continents. European mines in Saxony and the Tyrol did produce metals. Population consolidation after the plague may genuinely have concentrated productivity. And yes, American silver eventually did transform European economics. In the late 16th century, none of this is wrong. But these explanations tend to address the phenomenon from the demand side, what Europe wanted to do, without fully accounting for the supply side question. Where did the raw material come from before these mechanisms matured? The honest answer seems to involve both. Yes, Europe had functioning trade and banking. And yes, it was simultaneously cannibalizing an extraordinary inheritance of ancient physical infrastructure. The two things coexisted, and separating them cleanly may be less possible than the standard narrative implies. If the Renaissance was powered partly by inherited capital, by the systematic harvest of what prior civilizations had accumulated and left behind, then our understanding of European history shifts in a subtle but important direction. It suggests that golden ages do not emerge purely from genius. They emerge when genius encounters available substrate, when the right minds operate in landscapes already loaded with quarried stone, refined metal, and navigable infrastructure. The creativity was genuine. The abundance was partly borrowed. It also connects logically to what followed. The age of exploration did not simply arise from curiosity and ambition, though those were real. It arose at precisely the moment when domestic, inherited reserves began to show the strain of sustained consumption, when the Roman ruins were largely stripped, when the accessible bronze had been recast, when the easy capital was spent. Europe expanded outward. The pattern did not change. Only the geography did. This is the deeper lesson. And it is not limited to the 15th century. Civilizations do not always know when they are spending inherited wealth versus creating new wealth. The accounts look similar from the inside. Cathedrals rise, art flourishes. Thinkers write their masterworks. The city gleams only in retrospect. When the vault is empty, does the distinction become visible? Michelangelo's work is no less extraordinary for having been carved from marble with a complex history. Leonardo's genius does not shrink because the bronze available to his contemporaries had once been a Roman aqueduct fitting. The Renaissance produced real and lasting beauty, and that is not under dispute here. But the myth of total rebirth, of Europe rising purely from its own inspiration, conjuring abundance from intellectual fire alone, that myth may deserve to be set aside. What sat beneath the Renaissance was older than the Renaissance. The floors were Roman, the columns were Roman. In some cases, the very statues being celebrated as rediscovered masterpieces had simply been waiting undisturbed, beneath the rubble of a city that never fully went away. Europe's kings were wearing out stockpiles. The question is whether anyone was keeping count. History does not always announce what it is doing. Sometimes it simply builds a beautiful facade over much older foundations and calls it a new beginning.